Hello and happy World Consumer Rights Day. Welcome to this celebration marking the 40th anniversary of the adoption of the UN Guidelines for Consumer Protection by the UN General Assembly on 16th April 1985. Today's webinar is part of Consumers International Sustainable Lifestyle Summit, a just transition to sustainable lifestyles. My name is Arnau Izaguirre. I'm a legal officer at the Competition and Consumer Policies branch of UN Trade and Development, UNCTAD, the focal point on consumer protection issues within the United Nations family. The UN Guidelines for Consumer Protection, and I'm going to try to share a link here at the chat of what we are talking about, that meaning the UN Guidelines. So let me tell you a little bit about the UN Guidelines for Consumer Protection. The guidelines were adopted, as I said, in 1985. They were expanded in 1999 and fully revised in 2015. They are the only global instrument on consumer protection, and they provide high-level recommendations to member states on issues ranging from electronic commerce to sustainable consumption, from product safety to financial services, from tourism to public utilities, you name it. It's really the whole pack of what consumer protection can look like at national and regional levels. And they also contain recommendations on policymaking and on good business practices. Today's session will reflect on the enduring impact of the UN Guidelines for Consumer Protection in shaping consumer policies worldwide. Our experts and policymakers will discuss how these guidelines have guided countries in fostering fair, inclusive, and sustainable consumer protection frameworks. We will explore emerging challenges, including digital transformation, environmental sustainability, and consumer vulnerabilities, and highlight the good practices for ensuring that consumer rights remain at the heart of economic policies. We have gathered a wonderful group of experts and friends of the UN guidelines coming from all corners of our world. This is Colombia, India, South Africa, Portugal, and Zambia. We have with us Carla Barata, Director General for Consumer Protection of Portugal, Eunice Fidi Hamavwaha, Acting Executive Director of the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission of Zambia, Carmen Ligia Valderrama at the Externado University of Colombia, and she was previously the Superintendent Delegate for Consumer Protection, Superintendent of Industry and Commerce, and Deputy Minister for Transport and Minister for Information and Communication Technologies. We have with us Shirish Deshpande, Chairman of Mumbai Grahat Panchayat at India, one of the biggest and most significant consumer groups at UNCTAD's work on consumer protection. And we have with us, I hope, Laura Best, and I can see her now, from Oxford University and former adjudicative member of the National Consumer Tribunal of South Africa. And of course, we have with us as well, as a guest star, the head of Competition and Consumer Policies branch at UN Trade and Development, Teresa Moreira, who will share with us some concluding remarks. This session will be short and sweet, as a fireside chat with our thought leaders. I have a series of questions for our speakers, and I will ask them to keep their answers to 3 minutes. For our audience, I will propose some Slido questions for you to interact with speakers and each other. And I'm asking Charlie here to give me a hand with that, as this is my first time trying to navigate Slido as a moderator. So let's get started. Let's start with Carla. As Director General for Consumer Protection, can you share with us what lessons can be drawn from Portugal's experience in implementing consumer protection policies in line with the UN guidelines? Over to you, Carla.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
We
Yes?
can.
Okay. So first, I'd like to thank UNCTAD for this kind invitation to be on this panel today, saying this is an honor to participate on behalf of Portugal on a day that celebrates such an important document for consumer protection policy worldwide. It's also a privilege to see so many friends to whom I offer my best wishes also. So emphasizing the broad scope and timelines of these guidelines, I'd like to say that in Portugal, their principles are fully incorporated into national legislation and policies, and of course in line with our priorities. I will start with the general and cross-cutting principle of protecting consumers in situations of vulnerability or disadvantage, noting that is also a priority for Portugal. In fact, an awareness campaign is underway this year, dedicated in particular to elderly consumers, which aims to empower these consumers, namely in the situations they often face, such as door-to-door or telephone sales, for example. Another example I'd like to mention is financial vulnerability, referring that there is a bank customer support network in Portugal with 22 organizations through the country, providing financial literacy and free support and information to consumers who have found themselves unable to pay their loans. I also want to mention the issue of consumer education. And let me tell that which sometimes seems to be overlooked in the context of consumer policy, and which is fundamental because only consumers, we are fully aware of their rights and duties and who have all the information will be able to make informed choices. To this end, we have developed the consumer education framework in collaboration with the Ministry of Education and the largest national consumer association in Portugal, DECO, and we regularly train, teach to implement it. Another aspect I would like to mention is national legislation, the resolution on consumer disputes. As you know, we made arbitration compulsory for consumer disputes in essential public service, regardless of the value, and in other sectors up to of the value of 5,000 euros. And I will end, because I know the time is short, reiterating the United Nations guidelines as a fundamental document for the consumer protection policies and the role of the intergovernmental group of experts on consumer protection law and policy, and its working groups point out the importance and relevance of the topics covered in it. Thank you very much, Arnau. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carla, for giving us this broad view of how the guidelines have helped you. I'll come back to you with another question. I hope that we will have time. Let me now turn to Zambia with Eunice. As acting executive director of the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, what are the key consumer protection challenges in Zambia, and how have the UN guidelines for consumer protection helped you address them? Over to you, Eunice.
Thank you so much, Arnau, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are listening from. The key challenges that we face in consumer protection in Zambia, there's still limited awareness of consumer rights by consumers. Then financial and digital consumer protection, with the increase in e-commerce activities, we've seen that there's still a challenge to do with consumer trust, because there are too many scams, data privacy concerns, and then issues to do with product safety. We still have a big challenge with this issue, and then misleading representation and unfair business practices. This also include issues of displaying prices that are more than what, price display where consumers are charged more than what has been displayed, issues of disclaimers and unfair contract terms, and these undermine fair competition and consumer trust in Zambia. But then what the guidelines have done to address this, most of these challenges. First of all, we've seen that the legal framework has been aligned to the UN guidelines. And right now, we have the Competition and Consumer Protection Act, number 24 of 2010 in Zambia, being amended with the Competition and Consumer Protection Act, number 21 of 2023. In this act, we had to include, take care of the issues of digital markets, and also the issue of unconscionable conduct, because with the pandemic, we saw that consumers were being shortchanged. Then the issue of setting up of the authorities that are in charge of consumer protection. First of all, the Commission was established in 1994, although it started operating in 1997. So we've seen that with the guidelines, this helped the setting up of the institution and many other sector-specific regulators like the Zambia Information and Communications Technology Authority, which also deals with consumer protection issues, the Energy Regulation Board, the Pensions and Insurance Authority, and many others. Then we've also seen the Commission developing a number of IEC materials in order to take care of the issues to do with consumer education and awareness. And then we also do commemorate World Consumer Rights Day, which falls on the 15th of every month. And I'm just coming from a wonderful event that we were hosting. That's a panel discussion on the theme, which is a just transition to sustainable consumption, so sustainable lifestyles. Then we've seen that the Commission also conducts a lot of compliance trainings to the businesses just to make sure that they're in compliance with the law in order to allow competition, which makes it easy for consumers to get the benefits of competition. There's also policy advocacy. And lastly, but not the least, we have accessible redress mechanism. At the Commission, we have a toll-free line, which is 5678, as simple as all that, which Zambian consumers use to get to the Commission in order to lodge in their complaints. Of course, we have also a WhatsApp line, we have an email address, we also have physical interactions with consumers. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eunice. I'm really pleased to learn that the UN guidelines were useful in the revision of the Act. I'm also pleased to see that you're keeping up with the pace of new developments, 5, 6, 7, 8, and WhatsApp and whatnot. We'll come back to that later, also on the challenges. Let's now turn to Latin America. Carmen Ligia, you have been responsible for consumer policy in Colombia for many years and have a vast experience region-wide on consumer protection, engaging with other countries. Now you are at the academia and you've been doing research on the UN guidelines for consumer protection. So my question is, how have the UN guidelines for consumer protection influenced the legislation in Latin American countries over the year? Over to you, Carmen Ligia.
Thank you. Now, first of all, I would like to greet everyone connected around the world, and especially thank UNTACT and Consumers International for organizing this event. I would like to thank you particularly for inviting me as a speaker to share my experience and knowledge in consumer protection from the perspective of the guidelines for consumer protection in Colombia and Latin America in general. Indeed, I have been working on consumer protection since 1999. Based on my experience and knowledge, I have no hesitation in stating that the guidelines have influenced not only of the legislation in Latin American country, but also in the interpretation and application of consumer protection policies. Since we are short of time to present all the details, I will highlight only a few of them, although there are more. First, it should be noted that the Latin American country, as members of the United Conference of Trade and Development, UNTAC, have ratified the guidelines, which means that they are part of our legal system. Secondly, I must highlight that the integration and cooperation among Latin American countries, which has been consistently supported by UNTAC based on its guidelines. This has served to consolidate consumer protection legislation and policies at the national level in each of them, based on the reality of each country and also on the experience of other countries. For example, we cannot overlook the COMPAL program, a technical cooperation program that had the administrative and technical support of UNTAC, which for many years has allowed countries like Colombia and Peru, among others, to have the support to develop the consumer protection policies in each country. Thirdly, to address specific aspects, I cannot overlook the fact that UNTAC, based on one of its guidelines, supported and assisted in strengthening its education and information policies and programs in Latin American countries in general. To set just a few examples, I recall, for example, workshops held in different countries on financial services education so that authorities, companies, and consumers could understand the existing legislation on the subject and how it should be interpreted and applied to protect financial consumers. Other example is the seminar, The Consumer and the United Nations Guidelines for Consumer Protection, Emerging Challenges for the Modern Consumer, held in May 2023 by UNTAC and the National Secretariat for Consumer and User Protection of Paraguay. And lastly, for example, the Memorandum of Understanding signed by UNTAC for the purpose of carrying out research work and facilitating seminars and workshops such as the one signed with the University of Buenos Aires, Argentina in 2023. This is just 3 examples of hundreds of examples in that topic. And fourthly, we would like to highlight 2 of the most important guidelines that have had an impact in Latin America and are consistent with national legislation: sustainable consumption and e-commerce. These are certainly 2 aspects of consumer protection that, from Mexico to Argentina, have been addressed in line with the United Nations Guidelines for Consumer Protection. These topics, as is well known, are increasingly becoming the focus of public policy analysis and decisions to protect consumers. With this impact, it can be affirmed that the guidelines themselves have played an active and consistent role in the progress made by Latin American countries in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals, which we hope to achieve by 2030. Lastly, I will finally like to highlight the peer reviews examinations coordinating by UNTAC to assess the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for institutional improvement based on the provisions of the United Nations Guidelines for Consumer Protection. To cite an example, let's recall the one conducted in Chile in 2020, which has become an important tool for advising consumer protection policies in the country. In conclusion, to your question, now the guidelines have had an impact in Latin American countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmeligia. Thank you also for keeping the time and covering a whole continent in your answer. Thank you so much for enlightening us on this. Let me now turn to South Asia and come to our friend Shirish Deshpande, chairman of NGP India. Shirish, from a civil society perspective, how effective have the UN guidelines been in empowering consumers, particularly in developing countries? Over to you, Shirish.
Thank you, Arnav. But at the outset, let me first thank UNCTAD and also Consumers International for giving me this opportunity to be with you to share my thoughts on the topic which is so close to my heart, that is UNGCP. Fortunately, I have been a witness to this entire journey of UNGCP right from 1985 till 2025 till today. Okay, and we'll be very shortly celebrating 40 years on 16th April. So compliments on that also for UNCTAD, and also I compliment everybody present here today on the occasion of the World Consumer Rights Day, which we are going to celebrate on 15th of March. Having said that, now you say how effective the UNGCP have been in rather empowering the consumers. I would say it has been a very impressive progress And the contribution of UNGCP, as I have been watching it, has been simply impressive. Let me divide this entire journey of 25, rather 40 years into three phases. 1985 to 1999, I would say, is a period where the UN guidelines encouraged and prompted, or sometimes even I would say triggered the member nations of UN to enact consumer protection legislation. And with these legislations, if you see, India was the first one to immediately enact this thing. 85, the guidelines came, India enacted Consumer Protection Act in 1996, South Korea in 1991, Philippines in 1991, China in 1993, Taiwan 1994, Malaysia 1999. So a good number of countries drew inspiration from this document UNGCP and enacted consumer protection law and also the policies with a view to protect the consumers. And that is why I would say this is a significant contribution, and the credit goes to the UNGCP, which is a basic global document for the consumer protection. Having said that, this is the first journey. Then in 1999, as we all know, there was an amendment in the UN guidelines for consumer protection, and we incorporated the promotion for sustainable consumption. You know, that was a major threat, unsustainable lifestyle, extravaganza, and the entire future was in danger. Planet was in danger. And that is why I think all of us, we thought fit that you must have also a sort of a consumption side controlled with a view to have a sustainable lifestyle. And that is why the UN guidelines incorporated promotion of sustainable consumption, sustainable lifestyle. And I recall here the contribution of even Consumers International from 99 onward. I mean, we used to have the World Congresses every 3 years. In 2000, we had 2003, we had 2004, 2007, 2011, and all. Every 3 years, we used to have the World Congresses. Also, the regional Congress conferences of Asia Pacific region. And Consumers International sensitized this sustainable lifestyle and sustainable development in all their congresses. MGP had the opportunity of presenting its own distribution model, unique distribution model, which contributed to the sustainable lifestyle. So CI has a good deal of contribution in picking up this issue of sustainable lifestyle from UNGCP, sensitize it all over the world. And that is how even creating a sense of responsibility among the consumers for living a sustainable lifestyle. So that is again a major contribution. And then comes the third phase, that is a 2015 to 2025 till today. And I was directly associated with these deliberations, which we started from 2012 onward till 2015 for reviewing and revising the UN guidelines. Substantial revisions were made to incorporate all the latest challenges, what the consumers were facing, the changing markets, then all other things, including the e-commerce and all. And, you know, I mean, we had a good deal of changes in that. And the greatest change, I would say, is the creation of this, what you can call it as a intergovernmental group of experts, which is an oversight mechanism to see that these UN guidelines are implemented in all UN member nations. So this has gone a very long way in sensitizing the UN member states also, consumer bodies also, in seeing that major steps are taken. The consumer bodies are prevailing over the governments that, look, here is the document which says this is the thing to be done. And that is how major steps, major initiatives have been taken by the governments for the consumer protection all these years. So I would conclude by saying that UNGCP has played a substantial role in protecting the consumers and empowering the consumers. Just the last line, I would say that consumer protection and environment protection, these are all interrelated. And we must also focus on the environment protection. If we do not protect environment, consumers will not be protected. So let us protect the environment in order to protect the consumers. This is how I would say and sum up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shirish, for bridging the UN guidelines to the theme of Consumers International Summit of a Just Transition to Sustainable Lifestyles through sustainable consumption, but also bringing it to international cooperation, which is something that we will come back to in the second round of questions. I would now like to turn to Africa, and in particular South Africa. Our next speaker is Laura Best, a great friend of UNCTAD as well and of sustainable consumption. Laura, from your previous experience as a South African adjudicator on consumer policy issues and of academic, how can consumer protection policies be better integrated into the global sustainability efforts, particularly in achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? Laura, over to you.
Thank you, Arno, and greetings, colleagues, and everyone who's joined the conversation. It is indeed a very significant time to be hosting this conversation. I agree with colleagues, and particularly because, in my view, every single person on the earth is, in fact, a consumer. So, we're talking about this on International Consumers Day and the guidelines 40 years. It's really an opportunity. I think the other opportunity about policy is the fact that there actually is an SDG that deals specifically with consumer protection, and that is a bit of a hallmark for me in terms of the journey that we've been achieving in the world to achieve consumer protection within a sustainability concept. But I would like to hone in on two possibilities that I think are happening in different places, and I know that South Africa is looking to do in more depth. The first is about convening. And I say that because I think everybody would agree that sustainability has to be a multi-stakeholder and multi-dimensional quest in any circumstance. And that would hold true too for consumer protection policy. Now, in my experience, consumer government entities or any consumer active space is a place where we are used to working with many stakeholders and with diverse and sometimes competitive positions. And from that, we're used to synthesizing, integrating, and co-creating solutions. Now, that suggests to me that consumer protection entities or consumer protection organizations are very well placed as conveners of policy discussion for deepening the integration where it started, or of starting to trigger the integration where that still needs to happen. So we can draw on those lessons that we've learned from the consumer protection convening of different stakeholders, those skills that we've developed, those approaches and those strengths, and pool that to begin to reassess existing consumer protection policies in regards of sustainability and convene multi-stakeholder conversations to find integration. That would take, I would argue, joint agenda setting amongst multiple agencies and multiple stakeholders to achieve policy integration. It has been mentioned that we have some speakers who are from academia. I have had the privilege of dabbling there as well. And I think involving academia in research to inform policy choices is a very good way of leapfrogging and catapulting into new domains of policy thinking. The tribunal in South Africa actually now has research as one of its key objectives. And I think that that's a good practice that we could learn from. The other aspect that I would just touch on briefly that we can focus on, I think, is what is often called judicial activism, which can be about pushing the boundaries and demonstrating durability where policy seems to be stuck or does not seem to be integrated enough or take sustainability into cognizance yet. If it's a consumer protection tribunal, it can be using test cases to test legal boundaries. If it's consumer organizations, it can be agitating and bringing those types of cases before tribunals, bringing them to court with the view to setting precedents that can be integrated into policy. I think it's very important to reflect in spaces like the IGE that you referred to, Suresh, and the peer review that was spoken to earlier by Carla, where there is good practice, where it is working. How do we learn those lessons from each other so that we don't have to relearn the lesson in every single place? But if there's a great example in Asia or a good example in a country in South America, let's share that and let's use that so that we leapfrog and advance the integration as quickly as possible.
Thank you so much, Laura, for keeping with the time and also for bringing the accent to research. I'm going to share with you. Oh, I've seen then Charlie has shared the live poll on some questions of how the UN guidelines have helped you. And although I haven't been able to capture it and it kind of disappeared, I saw that the number one answer was the guidelines have helped me by guiding policymakers. So that was perhaps the most important issue that our participants are identifying, or the use for the UN guidelines for consumer protection. And I'm sharing here with you the website of the work of UN Trade and Development on competition and consumer policies that has a tab for research. This is where we produce our research, a bit like the Consumer Tribunal, but at the UN level, that we hope will be of interest to all participants here. And before I move to the next question, the next round of questions, let me also share with you the link to the UNCTAD research partnership platform on competition and consumer protection. And this is where we bring together academics and policymakers on competition and consumer protection to share ideas, to share projects, and really to cross-fertilize the two areas that are interested in consumer protection. I'm going to leave this here for now, but I'm going to come back to a question from Girish on international cooperation and bring it to the very particular leadership that Portugal is having in UN trade and development on consumer protection. Carla, back to you for the next question. How can international cooperation enhance consumer protection enforcement and policy alignment across jurisdictions? You have a vast experience in international cooperation and consumer protection. Tell us, how do you see this happening? Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Arnau. I will start by saying that the growing number of cross-border transactions combined with new challenges arising in particular from the digital and green transitions have brought into the debate the crucial need to strengthen international cooperation, particularly at enforcement level. At national level, of course, there is an increasing need to empower authorities, national authorities, with the human and technological resources to be able to face the new challenges. But I think there's one conclusion we have all common, that together we are stronger, and only together we will be able to find the most appropriate responses to the challenges we face, because they are the same in practical all geographic areas. And in this sense, cooperation is fundamental, and it is important that this cooperation could be developed within a framework in order to be more effective and more comprehensive, besides the bilateral cooperations, of course. And allow me to go back to the mention to the intergovernmental group of experts on consumer protection law and policy. And Arnau has just mentioned this platform, and I'd like to also say that this IG is unique compared to other fora in terms of consumer protection, because it brings together a huge diversity of entities, including national enforcers, consumer organizations, academia, like Professor Laura Best has underlined some minutes ago. In short, it brings together a lot of experience and knowledge. On the other hand, the fact that it covers so many countries and organizations allows for the exchange of information and good practices, particularly in the working groups, technical cooperation programs, and webinars that it organizes. In this field, allow me to just give some examples of the work carried out for the working group on consumer protection in digital commerce, with the enormous multiplicity of tasks it has carried out, highlighting also the adoption of the Declaration on Alternative Dispute Resolution in Consumer Disputes last July's meeting. I also like to mention the important working group on product safety and this work in favor of cooperation to protect health and safety across borders, and the working group on gender inclusion in the definition of consumer protection policies and its pioneering role in putting this issue on the international agenda. So finally, I will conclude by saying that in our opinion, the IGE is one of the fora par excellence for drawing all the stakeholders, which can find here the basis for work together, aiming the enforcement, the development of consumer policy also at cross-border level. Thank you very much, Arnaud. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carla, for putting this in context of international cooperation at global level. And I shared with our participants the link to the UNCTAD Intergovernmental Group of Experts website, where you will see all the different sessions and the documentation and whatnot. So thank you very much, Carla. Going back to the national aspect or arena of consumer protection, and back to Eunice, I would like to ask you, how can national consumer protection agencies strengthen enforcement and ensure greater consumer awareness and engagement in the current marketplace with the challenges that you have identified previously? Eunice, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anna. What national consumer protection agencies can do to strengthen enforcement include quite a number of aspects. They can be, we look at enhancing investigation techniques and skills for investigators. This helps to come up with sound investigations and decisions that are passed on cases. Then regular review of guidelines to reflect current trends. We're also looking at regional and international cooperation to learn international best practices. There's also imposition of fines on erring enterprises. This actually makes it easy for competition or consumer protection agencies to strengthen enforcement. Then utilizing technology to monitor market trends, such as implementing systems to monitor social media for consumer complaints and emerging trends. In Zambia, we do conduct also market sweeps just to see what is happening. And usually during our Black Friday promotions, we want to see whether those advertisements are correct, because sometimes consumers are told that there are price reductions and yet not. We also look at modernizing legal frameworks by advocating for legislation that addresses new consumer challenges in the digital economy, e.g. online privacy, deceptive advertising practices. Then also prioritize investigations into matters that affect the larger population. So we look at making sure that there are those public interest issues that we need to take care of. But we also go deeper to ensure that we really get enforcement to be really enhanced by translating of guidelines or even IC materials into local languages. We also strengthening advocacy, sensitization on consumer rights and welfare in general. So the public enterprises training on consumer protection provisions. We also believe that decentralization of offices to make sure that we are in almost every town of Zambia, it will help us to strengthen enforcement. But how we do it now is not by us really opening consumer protection agencies in every town. We have devised a mechanism where we know that local authorities are in all towns in Zambia. So we have appointed inspectors under our act to represent us as inspectors. So we work in conjunction with inspectors from the councils in order, or to the municipalities, in order to help us tackle all sorts of consumer protection concerns in their localities. But I must hasten to say that we are in all the 10 provinces of Zambia in terms of the offices that the Commission has. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eunice. I'm going to change a little bit the order of the speakers. So I ask you, Carmeligia, to bear with me because Eunice pointed to an issue that is very important to consumer policies, and that is partnerships and multiplying effects with other authorities, not only the designated consumer agency, but also local authorities with other stakeholders. So we're talking about businesses, consumer groups. And this is the question that I wanted to ask to Shirish. So I will go directly to Shirish now and ask you, how can consumer advocacy groups work with policymakers to ensure more inclusive and accessible consumer protection mechanisms for consumers? Can you give us that bridge, Shirish, in your opinion? Over to you.
Yeah. Am I audible now? Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Uh, Policymakers and the consumer bodies, they must be constantly in touch with each other because policymakers cannot live in silo. They must always have the inputs from the consumer bodies so that they know exactly where the shoe is pinching. And it is the consumer bodies who know where the shoe is pinching. Consumer bodies are also the watchdogs. So they know where the problem is. They have to be sensitized, sensitive to the needs of the consumers. You know, the technology is changing, the market dynamics are changing, the lifestyle of the consumers is changing, and the consumer bodies must have their this thing on the pulse of the consumers, and that thing they must reflect it towards and take it up to the policymakers and government bodies. Now, who else otherwise will give them the feedback on that? And for that purpose, there is a need that the consumer bodies need not operate only at the micro level, where only individual complaints are there and you guide them and all that thing. They have to rise to the level of policy making. And they must come to the macro level instead of only operating at the micro level and have a constant dialogue with the policymakers so that whatever the new changing technologies are there, new market styles are there, and often the consumer is bewildered. Today, now the way in which the technology is overtaking all of us, you don't know where to stand. And in last, particularly 10 years, if we see, there are three things that have actually put the consumer in a fix. First thing is the e-commerce, where you have a faceless online shopping. Second thing is a digital economy. And the third demon that is coming, a dinosaur I may call it, is the AI, artificial intelligence. All these three factors have tremendously impacted consumers' lifestyle. And in that case, it is the duty of the consumer bodies to take up these issues and prevail upon the policymakers and the governments and the enforcing agencies as to what are the steps and the measures that you are going to take to protect the consumers in the most challenging situation that we have never ever faced. It's an unprecedented situation that consumers have been facing. Consumer has never been so unsafe in the market, if I may say so. And in that case, it is the duty of the consumer bodies to take up these issues with the policymakers. And if they do so, then policymakers will have to really align themselves, the policies and all, with a view to protect the consumers. And again, I would say that UN guidelines and the UNGCP will and also should play important role. UNGCP has also been a dynamic document. I'm very happy to see that we have been always keeping changes, making changes in that to meet the changing needs of the consumers. So I'm sure with the changing times, if the consumer bodies all over the world, if they are sensitive to the consumer needs, they can take it up with their own national governments and also regional level and also at a global level with UNCTAD. I think I'm sure this purpose of the UNGCP of protecting the consumers all over the world and particularly in the developing countries will be substantially achieved.
Thank you, Shirish. Thank you for preaching that. I would now like to move to Laura and the latest work that she has conducted with UNCTAD that relates multilateral environmental agreements and consumer policies. Laura, what role do you think that these agreements that aim to protect the environment can play in shaping future consumer protection policies? Over to you, and I'm going to ask you to keep your answer to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Arno. Indeed, I see environmental agreements, and there are many of them. I'll pick on three, perhaps, as the twin of consumer protection instruments. So, for example, the Basel Convention deals with hazardous waste, transboundary movements. That is, of course, very significant for consumers. It also speaks to something that's similar, like e-commerce in its transboundary nature. So consumer people have experience with what that means to operate transboundary, cross-boundary. Another one would be the Rotterdam Convention, which deals with international trade in hazardous chemicals. Just that will tell you how significant it is for consumer health and safety. The Stockholm Convention, on the other hand, deals with the protection of human health and for environment and the environmental effects of persistent organic pollutants. We know that's becoming more and more known about, more and more aware about, and that is important to continue to do. There are many others too, and so not only are they important for consumers' individual health and safety, but also for the broader sustainability quest that I think we all now understand as one planet. So what does that mean, though, then, if these exist? First of all, I think we have to self-educate about what these conventions are, what these instruments are, how do they integrate and intersect with consumer protection, what can we do to partner? That brings me back then to the convening role of consumer protection interest spaces. If you're not already in conversation with bodies that may be dealing with these directly environmental issues, start the conversation. Start small, have informal coffee meetings and chats, updating each other, and start to build towards formalizing intersectoral and institutional arrangements. In government, sometimes that's in the form of clusters, interdepartmental committees. It need be a reconfiguration of departments to bring together that work. It's really, really significant, I think, that if we're not acting now already in concert, we start to find each other and to massify the common voice. And in that sense, I think we can become influencers. I hear you about AI, Suresh, but I think that there's a digital dividend too. We can use those spaces to cultivate consumer interest, not just at the point of sale with regard to hazardous substances and chemicals and hazardous waste, but I would argue involve consumers much earlier in the full scope and length and breadth of the supply chain. So build consumer awareness. What do those conventions say? They do allow, in certain instances, for voice to be included, for reports to be read, for people to come in and comment on those reports. I think that's a huge opportunity for consumer activists, for consumer organizations, and then for consumers themselves to get involved, to take up that invitation, and to, as I say, look at the whole supply chain of goods, not just when you're purchasing something, is it hazardous? But then you probably don't know. Although some of the conventions make provision for labeling, we know a lot about labeling as consumer protection people. Can we look at the types of labeling that is in some of these conventions? Does it suit the needs of consumers? Is it understandable enough? Is it accessible enough? Can we change that? Can we digitize that? We can, again, start small, start with the labeling where there is a provision in a convention, and we can massify that. So I think that the scope is quite significant. It's a real area of growth and collaboration, and we can be proactive about that if it's not already happening. I don't know, if I may, I'd like to close with an African proverb, which says that the earth is not ours. There's a treasure we hold in trust for future generations. And I think that those of us who think about sustainability understand that and have been active in that and have been following the United Nations lead since the 1990s in Brazil, I think it was the first Agenda 21. And that is beholden on us. I think we need to do our work with a conscience and with an awareness that it's a very big project that we have responsibility for. And we can do it if we work collaboratively with our colleagues in spaces like the environmental agreements. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you for putting us this long lights into the future. And this is precisely the last question I have for Carmeligia. It's what are the biggest challenges in ensuring that consumer protection law keeps pace with emerging global trends? As a lawyer, you may have some insights, but I will ask you, Carmeligia, to keep your answer to 3 minutes as we will need to be closing this soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnel. Well, more than the biggest challenges, I believe the key to ensure that consumer protection laws keep pace with emerging global trends is to be informed about what those trends are and to know how laws and public policy can protect consumers from those trends around the world. And to do so, I will substantiate this idea on two of the most important chapters in the guidelines, which are celebrating their 40th anniversary. Firstly, the international cooperation, and secondly, the intergovernmental group of experts of consumer protection law and policy. These are tools that have enabled and will continue to enable sharing experience, understanding on emerging trends, providing technical assistance, the provision of technical assistance, and creating capacity in our countries by formulating and implementing consumer protection policies and laws. I would like to mention an activity that has been taking place for 14 years in Latin America, for example, regarding consumer protection, where UNTAX annually organizes the International Forum of Consumer Protection in Latin America. In its latest versions, for example, organized jointly with the Consumers Protection Agency of the Dominican Republic in 2023 and the Consumer Protection Agency in Colombia in 2024, the topics focused on the resolution of cross-border consumer disputes, the role of consumer protection agencies in strengthening consumer associations, the future of regional cooperation in Latin America, the implementation of innovative policies in areas such as sustainable consumption, consumer protection in digital environments, and coordination with competition and privacy policies, among others. One of the most important aspects of this forum, for example, is that it serves as a platform for preliminary discussion leading to the formulation of proposals, which are then further defined at the Ibero-American Forum of Governmental Consumer Protection Agencies, and FIAC. So the same is true of the Intergovernmental Group of Experts, IGE, on Consumer Protection Law and Policy, an annual forum created to oversee the implementation of the guidelines, provide consultations, produce research and studies, provide technical assistance, conduct voluntary peer reviews, and periodically update the guidelines. It is undoubtedly a key body in ensuring that consumer protection laws keep pace with emerging global trends. And finally, I don't want to end without highlighting that consumer associations play an important role in ensuring that consumer protection laws keep pace with emerging global trends. They are the consumer spokespersons who can convey information about what's happening in consumer relations, as well as participate in proposing public policies to maintain legislation that truly protects consumers. It is also important to highlight that UNTAD has been working with consumer protection associations all of the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carmeligia. And since we're so short on time, I will not attempt to do a conclusion of this very insightful event. I will rather turn the floor to the head of competition and consumer policies at UN Trade and Development, Teresa Moreira, for her concluding remarks to this event before we close. Thank you very much. Teresa, over to you.
Thank you very much, Arnau. And allow me also to start by, thanking very much Consumers International for allowing us to host this event on this very important annual celebration that for some is just one day, others a week, a month, or monthly. So that was very interesting. So happy World Consumer Rights Day 2025 to all our speakers, participants, colleagues. I want to sincerely also thank our speakers. So in the sequence that you spoke, Carla, Eunice, Carmen Ligia, Shirish, Laura, all good friends, partners of UNCTAD. But I also wanted to tell our participants that we are extremely grateful, not just for member states experts, increasingly interest and active contributions, but also to the multiple fantastic inputs, suggestions, ideas that we have been receiving from other key stakeholders, so consumer organizations such as MGP India or academics from other international regional organizations and networks, and several of you mentioned them, and from civil society, so other environmental driven organizations, business associations, etc. So this is something that I believe has allowed us to achieve a number of very significant achievements since we first hold the first IGE on consumer protection in 2016. Just one more minute to cover two other points, more substantive. I heard very interesting and many interesting developments across continents from our friends, speakers, who are, of course, our colleagues and friends. I wanted just to draw your attention to the fact that we will have a discussion in July in our conference on synergies between competition and consumer protection. It was very interesting to hear Eunice, but also to hear about collaborate on competition and consumer protection, of course, but also on partnerships with business associations that Shirish mentioned, with academia and other public bodies. Laura mentioned the judiciary. Of course, Carla mentioned financial sector regulators in Portugal and other bodies like the Ministry of Education for the Portuguese manual for as a reference for consumer protection education. So I thought it was quite interesting because it shows that this links very well with this topic. And I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that we will be advancing on consumer product safety with an expected draft resolution. We will be discussing the digital economy / e-commerce challenges, so artificial intelligence and consumer protection. We will continue to discuss sustainability issues with circular economy. We will hear from all our informal working groups' latest developments. We will discuss the implementation of the cross-border declaration on dispute resolution and redress. And I finish with this. We will be assessing the functioning of the IGE on consumer protection. And there is a roundtable on competition and food markets, to which I draw your attention, because Consumers International and other organizations have raised issues due to the cost of living crisis and its impact in food markets. So you may want to attend all of this. So again, thank you very much. I hope to be able to welcome you in July in Geneva, 7 to 11. We know it's a very good time to come to Switzerland and to be around the lake. Let's continue this very positive and fruitful work. And again, thank you for your participation, for your interest. UNCTAD depends on your lively contributions. And this is, frankly, what we have achieved is a collective body of work of which we at the Secretariat are very proud. And I seem to understand that you are also. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Happy World Consumer Rights Day. Happy birthday, UN Guidelines for Consumer Protection. Continue in other sessions of Consumers International World Consumer Rights Day celebration in this 2025 summit. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.